Hi Patrick, this video is going to give you some feedback on your Writex number 1. You have probably already seen that I have uploaded a revised version of your text to IceCore. I've used track changes so you can see my corrections, anything that I've added and things that I have commented on about your text. You can see that in the bubbles in the margin. You will also see some highlights in yellow. Those highlights, I do those when I've already corrected that particular error earlier in the text. So instead of going back and correcting them again and again and again, I start to highlight them because it becomes tedious. And it also creates all of these bubbles in the margin, which can be overwhelming and it makes them hard to read. So there's kind of also a technical reason for that. So what I've done in the text is I've looked at the nuts and bolts of your writing and corrected your grammar and your vocabulary, things like that. It may be in the future I start asking you to do that and just give you how to do it in the bubbles instead of actually correcting it directly into the text. So that we'll see how that progresses. It's something I decide, on a case-by-case basis. The video here is going to be my more general summing up of my impression of the text. So you get an idea of my assessment of your writing and also what you can do to better your writing in the future. I like to start at the global level, the level that's to do with organization and structure of the text, structuring of the text. And then I'd like to go into the local level. I will basically sum up the corrections that I've made in your text. And then a little bit about what you can do for next time to improve things. I will say that the part of the text that functions the best, or the level that functions the best, is the global level. I think you have a pretty good idea of what it is that you want and what you want to say and how to kind of organize the text so that you get your point across. I think generally your paragraphs work as well. So you demonstrate that you know how to do this, that you have an idea of how to do this. So all of that is working very well. I want you to go back and consider how you begin and how you end the text though, because you have an introduction, but it's a lot like an academic paper or an academic essay. And what you were asked to do here is to write an article for the British Army Review. So an article in a publication has a much broader and more diverse readership than the academic essay, because the academic essay has already been, you've kind of weeded out a lot of people with the academic essay, because the persons reading this will be persons already interested in the topic. Whereas if someone was to pick up the British Army Review and just flick through it and see what is on offer today, they will say, okay, if there's not an interesting first couple of paragraphs, if it's not clear to me why this is relevant or interesting, I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to flick through it and not see it. So make sure that you have an introduction that frames what it is that you want to talk about. Talks about Ludwig and the gist of his thesis. And then what's going to happen with the text? Are you going to try and persuade the reader? Are you going to make the reader come around to your point of view, to see a new perspective, to challenge how we see war in contemporary conflicts? What is going on? And then make sure that when you come to the end that you actually wrap up what you've been saying, so the reader feels that he or she is left somewhere where there is a conclusion of some sort, or at least kind of a wrapping up of the main events in the text. It's not always that we can conclude something as such, but we need to wrap up things and say, okay, these are all the perspectives that I find relevant, basically. Okay, so think of this less as an academic paper, more of an article, and when you read through your text, have this reader perspective with you to make sure that you're living up to the expectations of the genre, the article, and that the reader is sort of that you facilitate the reader's understanding, that you make sure the reader is able to understand what you're saying, taking into consideration that the reader is not an academic, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so that's the global level. Just to reiterate, a lot of things are working here, because on the global level, this text kind of goes in the opposite direction. So where there's strength in how you deal with the text as a text on the organizational level, your language and your ability to express yourself in English kind of pulls in the opposite direction. So it's one of those things where the two levels that I'm looking at kind of point in each direction, and then you land somewhere in the middle. So the general impression of your text lands in the middle. And I will say that it's how you express your thoughts in English. The nuts and bolts of writing is where you need to work more, because it seems the other things you've got that. You can improve on them, sure, but there's a lot there that's already in place. So two grammatical categories that I'd like you to be aware of. One more important than the other, because you tend to make more mistakes in one than the other. Firstly, subject-verb agreement. In Danish, that's called congruence. Look in the following lines to see my corrections regarding subject-verb agreements. 4, 11, 21, 53, and 60. If you can't remember what congruence or subject-verb agreement is about, you can Google it. There are plenty of resources, both in Danish and in English, that will give you the grammatical rule for how to correct this. It is pretty straightforward. Once you get it, it's straightforward to do, or at least to understand. The problem, of course, is whether or not you can do it as you're writing. It might be one of those things where you go back and look for those errors in a systematic way. The other thing that I see a little bit of is the possessive case, eller ejefæld. The apostrophe S, or just the apostrophe. You can look that up as well. Possessive case or ejefæld. And if you want examples in the text, you can go to line 10 and line 12. So those are grammatical categories, and in a sense they're easy to deal with because there's an explanation and there's direction in terms of how to do it right. The other thing has to do with linkages between words, or rather what words can actually be linked together, what words can stand next to each other in English, and choosing the right word for the meaning that you want to convey. There are some issues with that. That is more difficult to correct because there isn't a hard, fast rule for that. What I would advise you to do here is to try and write as specific and simple and precisely as you can. That doesn't mean that you dumb down what you want to say. It's not a dumbing down, it's more of a breaking it up into smaller pieces. In Danish we have this wonderful expression which really says it all, skær det ud i pap. If you can do that, you can express it in a simple way that means that you're in control of the language. And it means the reader can just flow through the text without stopping at these sentences that don't quite make sense, where you're not really sure what it means. Because it hinders the reading if we're not sure how to understand a sentence. It's like a hurdle we have to go over every time as a reader, and you want to try and avoid that. So by writing very specific, simple and precise sentences, you can kind of cut some of that fuzziness away, and you can always go back if you think it's too simple. You can go back and elaborate, or you can rewrite once you know what it is you want to say. But it's a good way of gaining control of what you're writing. I really want you to focus on that. And that also means for the future that I'd like you to set some time aside for the editing phase. So when you edit your text, when you think you've got the main body of the text, read through it. Firstly, thinking as a reader, to check for coherence, to check that you've got this, what we call the red thread running through, and it isn't broken in places. And then read again, checking whether the language is communicating in a clear and straightforward way. Because that's going to balance out the fact that you do know how to write. You know what goes into an essay. You know what's expected of you in terms of this type of writing. But the language has to be improved so that there is a balance between the two. Okay, that's all I want to say for now. If you want a grade for this, come and see me. I don't give out grades as a default. I usually only give out grades to the people who want it. Some people prefer not to be graded and would rather focus on how to improve. I'm fine either way. So come and find me either at my office, or I'll see you in class at the end of September. Bye.